Hi, everyone. My name is Ashton Bitton from Mindlink Resources. Today, I'm going to be introducing a multi-video series that Mindlink is going to be doing over the next couple of weeks or so that will be talking about how to achieve affordable quality translation for your business. So to kind of lay the foundation for things, this is going to be in reference to a blog post that was posted earlier last month in April on the Mindlink memo, which is the Mindlink Resources blog. The article is titled "Finding Balance for Affordable Quality Translation," and it includes a really handy infographic, if you ask me. So this article kind of touches on different aspects of translating for your company. So, it talks about what goes into making translation good. Is it worth it to pay for it to be extra professional, or are there cases where you can kind of get away with using Google Translate, or just doing finding the in-between. So I'm going to read a couple of sentences from the start of that blog. Have you ever been in this scenario? You want to use professional translators to reach your target audience. You even send your important document to a translator or two to get a quote. But when those quotes come back, you get a yowza sticker shock. So you end up shelving that project or slapping on a Google Translate widget on your site. It's a shame because you are really trying to provide complete access by using human translators, but when you're running a small business or nonprofit, despite all your good intentions, sometimes the choice of good over cheap translation is just too big of a gap. So we'll be talking about that today with Stacey. So here we go. Hi, Stacey. All right, so Stacey, what do you got to say? Take us away.
Thank you, Ashton. That was a good intro. I think we should put the link for the blog post in the notes of the video so that you'll have a chance to take a look at that. But we do want to talk to you today and through this series about, like Ashton said, that middle ground. And so today, our first video is just going to be a discussion, mostly between Ashton and myself. But of course, we're hoping to continue it on through the comments of this video. And, and it's also something, of course, we love for you to subscribe, to our Mindlink memo and definitely engage with us in this conversation, because we know there's a lot of creative ways to provide language access that may not break your bank. So I'm going to share my screen because we prepared a couple of little slides. But here's today's topic: the affordable translation, good versus cheap. And it does feel like a battle sometimes. Right?
Absolutely.
But I think the big thing here is I want to talk about language access. And I don't know, Ashton, what do you think of language access?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, language access, it's kind of self-explanatory in a lot of ways, but also not. So it's basically just, making it so that what you have to say is also able to be, accessible to other, other communities that may or may not speak your language.
Right.
So for example, I'm going to college this fall. I need to complete a FAFSA in order to get financial aid. FAFSA also has their information printed in Spanish. So if you're from a Spanish-speaking background, it's a little easier for you to kind of get those nitty-gritty technical details down in Spanish. That opportunity is available to you. Just an example.
Yeah. And the reality with language access, especially if you provide either like a nonprofit service, or maybe you have a small business, but you work with people in your community, and you work with non-English speakers, it's as important as, thinking about, okay, well, we do accommodate, disabilities. We do accommodate, for a lot of things. And we have to kind of acknowledge that we have different cultures and different languages that live in our communities. And so, how do you make your service your product or whatever it is that you provide? How do you make that accessible to someone who maybe isn't literate in English,
Right.
for whatever reason?
Right.
And certainly if you've ever traveled abroad, and I know Ashton has recently,
a little bit,
you kind of, and you speak the minority language, or, it is nice when
it's very helpful.
It's reached out.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
Language. Yeah,
Definitely.
for sure. Yeah. So language access is something like anyone who provides a service, either through a nonprofit, government agency, small business, anything like that, needs to think about if they're trying to engage with clients that don't speak English, right? And we call those people that don't speak English well, there's actually a term. It's, here, I'll show you.
Okay.
They're limited English proficient, LEP. And, if you work in healthcare, you'll come across this term a lot. Because if you think about it, there's some real scary statistics about people not engaging with vital services because it isn't available in their language.
Yeah, isn't it something like 1 in 20 people in America have difficulty, communicating or using English? Is it something like that?
Yeah, okay. Exactly. Yep, that is the stat. 1 in 20 can't. So if you've ever been in a waiting room and there's 20 people in there, there's at least one, that can't. Right. Doesn't understand what's going on, I'm not talking about broken English. I'm talking about they don't get it. It's really difficult for them. And I think, we could probably get in a discussion about why that is. I think we could always do a better job of I think historically in our culture, there's been this pressure, like, well, you live in America, you got to learn English, but it's just not a realistic expectation if you've ever tried to learn a language, right?
English is freaking hard to learn.
Yeah. English, and you don't just crazy. Like wake up because you're in America and know it.
Exactly.
You're trying to learn it, right?
Yeah. That's just not possible.
I mean, I lived in Italy and immersed myself and tried to learn the language there, and it took me a good 6 months in country before I could communicate basic needs.
Right.
Unfortunately, there, people understand English, but sort of. But you have to understand it, depending on your the country of origin, it may take you 6 months, may take you 6 years to really get that.
Totally.
So it isn't really a question of, well, learn English.
You live here and learn our language. Suck it up. That's just not a, That's just not really
that, yeah, it gives me a rash whenever I hear that. So anyway, the reality is there are limited English speakers among us, and we can choose to help them, come out of that and not stay invisible. And that's really, what we're trying to achieve by offering language access, right?
Totally. Awesome.
Yeah. So what does that mean? Like, how would we, what are the services that we would offer?
Right. How would we even start going about doing that?
Right.
As a small business or even just individuals, really.
Yeah. And I hear that from people. Like I say, do you work with non-English speaking clients? And people are like, yes, I do. And so then the next question is, well, how do you deal with that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've had some experience with that, right, Ashton, in a working environment?
Yeah, multiple times, actually. I was working with a temp agency at, oh gosh, I can't really remember the name of the place, but basically just one of those like run-of-the-mill fall time, elementary school picture taking companies, things like that. So I was working there as a temp for a little bit, and there was one lady in the entire division that I was in that was fluent in Spanish. And I currently live in an area where there's a pretty hefty Spanish-speaking population. And, you know, a lot of these parents would, you know, want to call in, check and see on, you know, the status of their kids' pictures, the status of their payment for the pictures, things like that. And most of them would have preferred to speak in Spanish. You know, that was just the easiest thing. And so because there was one lady in my entire division that was fluent in Spanish, all of those calls were kind of shoved onto her. But this was really problematic because that wasn't necessarily the reason that she was hired. I mean, she was hired to handle these pretty big accounts. But because all of these calls were kind of being thrown her way, you know, she wasn't able to really work on the thing that she was actually hired to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I hear that a lot where people use somebody on their staff to communicate with these communities, which is, I think, fine if that's kind of their job, but also understand that there are people that do this professionally, providing both translation and interpreting, and something like that, you know, like maybe a simple flyer printed in Spanish, that they could hand out when, you know what I mean? Like that might have made a big difference for people. Maybe they wouldn't have to call as often, you know? So it may be something as simple as that. That's really not that expensive to do, as opposed to having somebody on staff, you know, designated for that. So, you know, again, that's one of those balance things, like how, you know, how do you think about this?
Yeah.
But it is good that they thought about it enough that they wanted to hire a Spanish speaker.
This is true.
To address that. So, but I think it's good to know too, this is kind of a key understanding when you're working with non-English speakers, the difference between a translator or translation versus interpretation. Interpretation is oral or spoken translation. And now people use translation to describe both of these, but you know, from a professional standpoint, you have professional interpreters and you have professional translators. Sometimes they can do both, sometimes they cannot. So it's really important to understand when they're doing over the phone, that's interpreting.
Right. Or like in person in a doctor's office or something.
Exactly. Like that. Yeah. Right. And so I think it's important to understand that when you're kind of looking for somebody to help with language, you know, I think the tendency is just to find somebody who's bilingual and expect them to be able to do this. But do you speak a language, Ashton?
Yeah. I mean, not like bilingual proficiency, but enough to.
Have you ever been asked to interpret, you know, in a situation?
No.
I have, and let me tell you, if somebody not trained in this, it's a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
It's not just something anyone can pick up and do.
Yeah.
I mean,
they have programs on how to interpret. Yeah. It's like language schools devoted specifically for how to interpret.
And maybe that's not required for what you think you need, but I think it's important to be aware that there's a reason, there's a whole profession around this, right?
Yeah.
Like
definitely.
You can do your own accounting, but at some level you need to hire a professional who knows what they're doing, right? I mean, it's just like anything where you try to do it yourself versus, you know, you're going to be probably happier with the results and your customers are going to be a lot happier too.
Totally.
So understanding that, and then so interpreting are the in-person oral talking. Translation are, you know, they can take your English, you know, forms and then convert them into the target language, which would be like Spanish or Arabic or whatever is common in your area. Right. So, and sometimes, you know, you can avoid, because interpreting can add up if you just rely on interpreters to be that conduit with your clients, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you know, there's a reason we want to, you know, hand a flyer to someone and say, here.
Yeah. Because this looked over. We know this makes sense. It's not just word salad.
Right.
Yeah.
You can imagine if you had to hire someone to read your flyer to every client, that gets more expensive. Right. So, and also taking away staff that's been hired to do something else
Right.
Taking them away from that activity to read what could be in a flyer, to someone. Is that really, there's some ROI, I guess you could calculate. Is that really the best use of everyone's time?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So. Awesome.
Yeah. So these are just things to think about.
Yeah, like why it even matters,
Right, exactly. And that's, that's kind of a big question. Why does it matter?
Right.
One, you don't want to be a jerk, right?
Right. Why would you intentionally be a jerk?
But yeah, we put together, and this is in another blog post we can add to the notes here.
Yeah.
But I'll just post this real quick here for you. You can see that it does matter because there are 1 in 20 people that experience difficulty and that feel invisible in their communities, that aren't accessing services, that aren't accessing your product or service. Almost 14% of the population in the US speak a language other than English at home every day. That's, not a small number. 300 plus languages are spoken in this country. It's not a small thing. But a big reason is it's, providing language access is the law. It's part of the Civil Rights Act, right? So, and that's why in a legal scenario or medical scenario, you'll see them requiring you to hire interpreters or translators. But it actually is part of inclusion and diversity is by offering language access. Understand too, from an economic standpoint, 75% of clients are more likely to engage, to buy your thing, to convert, if you know what that means, right? Yeah. 75% are more likely to convert if the message is in their target language. Some of this, like you could use to get a return on that investment, these kind of numbers, right?
Yeah.
And this is a little bit morbid, but the reality is people that are limited English proficiency, the LEP people, they're less likely to call 911. They're less likely to seek healthcare unless the providers do meet their linguistic needs. And then delayed healthcare can result in lost wages, decreased productivity. You may have in some cases, some people's limited English speakers are their staff, and they're not accessing benefits that they could be accessing because it's not available in their languages,
right?
Or they're missing work more often, or so there could be some real impacts that could be avoided.
Yeah. Totally.
So yeah, I think we've made our case. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course.
Are you convinced?
I'm convinced. I don't know. I hope our viewers are convinced. Obviously, this is something that needs to be addressed. So yeah,
well, we're just trying to do our part. So yeah, the next video, we're going to get a little bit more into, the practical aspects of some things you can do yourself, that'll help make language access a little easier for your organization. So
getting more into the practicality of things.
That's right. So stay tuned.
Yeah, definitely. We'll come out with another video pretty soon, I would say. Quick turnaround on these. But yeah, so thank you, Stacey, for giving us the lowdown on, translation, localization, why affordable translation matters and can be attained, and why we should care.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again.
Awesome.
See you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.